Okay, glad you're along tonight, hour two. We're going to talk to Dr. Bill Deagle this hour, so sit down and put on your seatbelts. A lot of information coming your way. The latest from Fukushima, by the way, is the hourly release rate of admitted radiation is now 70 million becquerels per hour. That's the admitted amount. That's just what they're talking about in the air, not what's being flushed out in the ocean. It was 60 million an hour a month or two ago. It's gone up to 70 million. TEPCO says, oh, that's because workers are in there stirring up the dirt and dust and bringing it out of the plant with them. Sorry. These people have absolutely no conscience whatsoever. They're killers. And they're killing us. Remember, the Pacific Ocean is finished. It's toast. If you study ocean currents for even 5 minutes on the internet, you'll understand there's a very intricate circulatory system all throughout this body of living water and animal life. And that circulatory system is carrying radioactivity all over the Pacific. Northern Pacific, granted, not below the equator yet. But it's on the West Coast, it's in Canada. The Canadians have studied this, the government, but they will not release the results to the public. Bill, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Lots of updates. One of the most remarkable things happened in the last few days, and I was kind of puzzled. And then I listened to the clips later today from Michael Collins. I thought, my gosh, he found the same thing up in Santa Monica as I found here in North County, San Diego.
Right.
Which is the radiation level dropped for the first time, consistently stayed down, not at ground, we call base level or background level, which is normally around 22 to 26, but it stayed around 30 to 32 and hasn't popped up for a couple of days. And I said, this is strange. Because we know that reactor number 4, Mock's cooling pool, had a earthquake that caused disruption of a pipe on January 2nd.
Yeah, broke it.
And it was radioactive plutonium detected as far east as all the way to Eastern Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that the radiation that's been detected in the fall, right before Christmas, of radioiodine-131, was not from a local reactor in Eastern Europe or Western Europe, an old-style, Chernobyl-style reactor from the Russian era, the era of the Soviet Empire. And these old doddering reactors, by the way, are still there. But it's not them. No, what's going on is Fukushima, I think, is now actually tunneled so deep into the ground that we're going to have several things happen. The first is, this has not gone away. The nuclear critical reactions are continuing. So what we're having is the corium is so deep, it's building up pressure, and it's going to cause one of several types of things. Number one is a hydrovolcanic explosion where it generates enough pressure you literally get an explosion like a volcano. Number one. Number two is it's going to cause superheated steam that'll vent for kilometers away from the site. They could pop up in a schoolyard or a road or anywhere.
Sure.
And, of course, because it's only a few hundred yards from the ocean, it's probably going to vent directly into the ocean floor. And we know that about 83% of the radioactivity, by estimates of air currents and water currents, was dumped directly into the Pacific or went east toward us and toward Europe.
83%? That's your figure?
That's
83?
the estimate I've heard from my scientists, that they figure around 83% went directly eastward into the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, the other thing is that the local radiation that's pushed up on the coastline continues to be pushed back and forth by wave action and gets vaporized. So it goes 5 to 7 kilometers in. So if you can taste the seawater in the air, you know that you're also getting nanoparticles of radioisotopes.
Oh, that's what we talked about last night.
Now, of course, the Humboldt current, which carries it toward North America and splits and goes north toward Alaska and then down toward the Baja California.
Mm-hmm.
There's another set of currents that people may or may not be aware of that could be the reason why we've detected that radiation off of the east coast of Australia. And it's that there are connections between the jet stream and connections between high altitude rivers in the upper stratosphere. And the stratospheric oceans of water, or rivers of water, and there's about 6 major ones, but one of the major ones in the Pacific Ocean carries 100 times more water per day than the Amazon, which is the biggest river on Earth. So there's a potential if those particles get in that upper atmosphere, and these rivers do cross the equator. They're not controlled like the trade winds at the equatorial area. They cross the equator, which means I've got an engineer now in Vilcabamba. There's also a report now in Australia. So you wonder, are some of these they're somehow now getting a connection between the radiation levels at lower altitudes, getting into these high altitude super rivers, if you want to call it, that carry, billions of cubic miles of water every day, more than the Amazon, all over the upper atmosphere of the Earth. Right?
Exactly.
So that's one of the questions. You have to start asking questions like, what is this? Why did it go all of a sudden back to background? And when I heard that Michael Collins done the same thing I was testing every day, and I went outside and did a couple of tests with the rain, because it's been raining here lately, and I figured, it's radioactive.
Mm-hmm.
I went out and tested during the rain the last 3 days. It's like, it's not. This is weird. It didn't go up at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's going on here? But before, when I do it, you'd see it just go bump, 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 and it go crazy. And of course, it's very easy to take two materials and determine it's alpha, beta, and gamma, because you can stop some of the radiation particles very quickly with very simple things like a piece of paper and other things like that, which is relatively simple to do. So you can get an estimate of whether or not predominance is a certain type of particle, but it doesn't tell you what the isotope is unless you have advanced technology like the nuclear engineering department that's now shut down at UC Berkeley. So Fukushima, if this is cold shutdown, then we're in hell.
Oh, it's not cold.
It's crazy. These people in Japan have, if they want to get another job, they need to get a job at SNL, Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
Because they're either crazy or they're comedians.
Well, the amazing thing is the discipline of the Japanese people to walk in lockstep with what they're told to do. Now, there are some demonstrations, but it's a small amount. Meanwhile, you got children not growing. You got cerebral malfunctions being misdiagnosed and hidden by the government. Obviously, it's mass radioactive poisoning. But the people are being sacrificed, and they are literally marching to their own graves without complaining much. It's sickening. It's just sickening.
Well, you wonder if it's several things. Firstly, people should realize that Japan has more nuclear reactors per square surface mile than anywhere else.
It's weird.
And every nuclear reactor has been bending off radioisotopes for years. So we wonder, is it due to cultural issues? Is it due to chronic radiation exposure?
Or is it due to chronic exposure to radiation?
Right. Because, for example, most people aren't aware of this, but all, that means not just some, just the majority, all nuclear reactors vent off at least tritium and other radioisotopes on a regular basis. They have cross connections, and they have problems between the central core reactor cooling system and the external systems that put water back into a bay or cooling pond or whatever outside the reactor. So the idea that somehow this has been happening, so you can actually show that there are zones of illness up to about 120 miles around any reactor anywhere. So if you draw circles around every reactor in Japan, pretty well every square mile in Japan is a pretty high concentration of being vented tritium, strontium, and other radioisotopes like cesium for a long time, long before Fukushima.
It's amazing.
By the way, I'm just speculating because I know that their behavior doesn't seem rational.
Well, they've all, according to Yoshi, this is kind of the ethic of the Japanese culture. This goes back to World War II. They'll die for the emperor. They do what they're told. This, of course, has changed, but there's still something going on there that is not common to our culture here at all.
Yeah. Well,
they just don't get out and raise hell like we used to, at any rate.
Well, a couple of good news. There's some good news now. Now they've given some very bad news.
Let me sit down for this. All right.
Yeah, the good news is, we talked about it earlier, I just spent quite a bit of time talking to the president of the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, Dr. Al Barrier, and it was put forward by Dr. Bernhoff to the board of the Academy, and on January 19th, 2012, the board has come to the conclusion and put out a position statement that the implementation of smart meters globally should have an immediate moratorium. So that's really good news. And if they go to
that should be headline news.
Yeah, I actually read the article and have the PDF on my first hour of my show today, which is NutriMedical. If they go to NutriMedical.com, they can pull up the PDF and they can listen to me actually reading the actual statement there. I will be getting Dr. Bernhoff, who's here in California, on the program. And I'm really close to the filing of my suit. And what I found out, and this is the latest legal argument.
Repeat what he said. Bill, please, excuse me. Repeat what he said again for anybody who wasn't paying close attention.
He basically said that and maybe I should pull up the actual AEM statement. That'll help. I'm just going to yank up my documents here, and I'll have this in a second. But what it basically said was that the Academy finds that that the implementation of these is an extreme environmental danger to the public, and that there's considerable literature to show that they cause both genetic and developmental problems that, combined with other toxins in the environment, such as genetically modified food and other toxins, are going to cause a burden of illness that will become very evident, that the literature shows that until otherwise, that it is an immediate moratorium in every place on the planet. Now, first, people have to understand how serious smart meters are. A lot of people have been exposed to cell phones, Wi-Fi networks, etc. But as soon as the smart meters come to their community, you get a burden of people that immediately get sick within hours or days.
Right.
This is there's something different about them.
Yes,
they generate because we have a lot of switching mode power supplies that generate.
Well, you know that, but don't worry, folks. We have to take a break here. The utilities will promise us that they only transmit 2 or 3 times a minute, if that.
Oh yeah, but when you confront them with the facts, they're.
Yeah.
So I've had that article. When we come back, I can read a few selected words from that
please.
PDF.
Very good. All right, be right back with Bill in just a minute. Okay, welcome back with Bill. All right, Bill, you want to read a little bit of that? That's a very important development. It's going to be enormous in court.
This is from the board, by the way. This is the top board of the top environmental academy for medical doctors on the planet. And I'm preparing actually one of the lectures, both on Fukushima and a separate lecture talking about smart meters and scalar radiation from cell phones and Wi-Fi networks, etc. And that'll be given this year, and I'll have the PowerPoint's up on my site, as well as the video of my presentations as well to the Academy. The January 19th, 2012, decision was proposed by PV mailed 11/22/2011 before the Public Utilities Commission of the State of California on the proposed decision 1103-014. Dear Commissioners, the Board of the American Academy of Environmental Medicine opposes the installation of wireless smart meters in homes and schools based on a scientific assessment of the current medical literature. References available on request. Chronic exposure to wireless radio frequency radiation is a preventable environmental hazard that is sufficiently well documented to warrant immediate preventive public health action. As representatives of physician specialists in the field of environmental medicine, we have an obligation to urge precaution when sufficient scientific and medical evidence suggests health risks which can potentially affect large populations. The literature raises serious concerns regarding levels of radio frequency 3 kilohertz to 300 gigahertz or extremely low frequency ELF 0 hertz to 300 hertz exposures produced by smart meters to warrant an immediate and complete moratorium on their use and deployment until further study can be performed. The board of the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, by the way, it's not just American, it's the World Academy Canadian, we have European and doctors worldwide, wishes to point out that existing FCC guidelines for RF safety that have been used to justify installation of smart meters only look at thermal image tissue damage and are obsolete since many modern studies show metabolic and genomic changes. Right? So that's really
very good. All right. Well, this is going to be interesting in court for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Yeah. Do you want me to read a little bit more?
Go ahead. Another minute or so. Yeah.
Yeah. And so. Since many modern studies have shown metabolic and genomic change from RF and ELF exposure below the level of intensity which heats tissues, the FCC guidelines are therefore inadequate for use in establishing public health standards. More modern literature shows immediate medically and biologically significant effects of RF and ELF at low energy densities. These effects accumulate over time, which is an important consideration given the chronic nature of exposure from smart meters. The current medical literature raises credible questions about genetic and cellular effects, hormonal effects, male fertility, blood-brain barrier damage, increased risk of certain types of cancers from radio frequency and ELF levels, similar to those emitted from smart meters. Children are placed at particular risk for altered brain development and impaired learning and behavior. Further, EM, a radio frequency.
Wow.
synergistic
Wow.
effects to the damage observed by a range of toxic chemicals. That, of course, includes GM. In fact, I talked at great length for over an hour to Dr. Barrier.
So what Bill
one
is
of the board
saying is the RF and EMF from these insane smart meters could interact with and even create worse pathogenic impacts of GM and all these other things.
Exactly. And
It's
in fact,
unbelievable.
one of the things that I was told this actually by my contacts inside the government, that the reason why they selected, which is, by the way, under Dick Cheney, the reason why they selected specifically, and Donald Rumsfeld, why they selected aspartame was because it was an electromagnetic pulse frequency entrainment toxin that caused the tissue of brains of animals to entrain to an external pulse magnetic field. So it's a glutamate agonist, and other glutamate agonists like Splenda and MSG. What they do is they activate the glutamate receptors in the brain, and they burn the brain out and cause damage to what's called the NMDA receptors, which, by the way, the latest research this week comes out and say that damage to the NMDA receptor is probably the primary cause of dementia. So we're going to see more dementia.
Oh, yeah.
I'll read on. Given the widespread, chronic, and essentially inescapable ELF, RF exposure of everyone living near a smart meter, the board of the American Academy of Environmental Medicine finds it unacceptable from a public health standpoint to implement this technology until these serious medical concerns are resolved. We consider a moratorium on installation of wireless smart meters to be an issue of the highest importance.
Can you send that? Can you send that so I can post that over here?
I will. I'm going to make sure you get that here as soon as we do this hour. The board of the Academy of Environmental Medicine also wishes to note the U.S. NIEHS, the National Toxicology Program, in 1999 cited radio frequency radiation as a potential carcinogen. Existing safety limits for pulsed RF were termed, in quotes, not protective of public health, end quote, by the Radio Frequency Interagency Work Group, a federal interagency working group including the FDA, FCC, OSHA, and EPA, and others. Emissions given off by smart meters have been classified by the World Health Organization, International Agency for Research on Cancer, the IARC, as a possible human carcinogen. By the way, that was May 31st, 2011.
Wow.
Hence, we call for an immediate moratorium on smart meter installation until these serious public health issues are resolved. Continuing with their installation would be extremely irresponsible. Modify the revised proposed decision to include hearings on health impact in the second proceedings, along with cost evaluation and community-wide opt-out. And number 3, provide immediate relief to those requesting it and restore the analog meters.
Well, these people will be eminently available to support any legal challenge to this outrage, I would hope. And
absolutely. In fact, they told me the board was 100% behind me and want me to present my lectures to the Academy so that it will become if you want to call it, a part of their material for continuing education for doctors that are stay certified and learn the latest information on this.
They're going to have to come up with a whole other set of criteria for trying to diagnose illnesses predicated on smart meter, EMF, RF, all of it.
I can tell you the specific criteria when we come back from the break, what I would do in terms of testing, because the technology exists right now.
Right. Well, you have GM-created illnesses and syndromes. Now you've got RF, EMF, smart meter-created illnesses and syndromes. And you have the two working synergistically, and God only knows what else with all the other chemicals and toxins in the food.
I can tell you how you can diagnose them, and we come back in a moment.
Very good. Well, the root of the word diagnose is die.
Well,
right.
Hopefully not D-I-E, ignose.
Yeah, I know.
Back in a moment.
Back in a minute. Talking to Bill Deagle, as we do once a week.
Yeah.
This AAEM, thank you for sending the AAEM paper. I'll put that up tonight.
We'll get that on the break pretty quick, eh?
Yes. Oh, yeah, thanks. This needs to go. And all of you out there who are activists, and hopefully all of you are, this needs to go into your hands, into your mailbox, and from there be sent to your local utility printed out and handed to your local utility when they come around to try and stick a smart meter on or whatever.
Yeah. And by the way, we have before the holidays, we had a media person actually, as a producer up in Hollywood, put together a package. You can go to refusesmartmeters.com and you'll get a link directly to his package, which is for $49. You can get an analog meter, all the stickers, all the legal documents you must serve to your utility first. You must make sure your utility bill is paid up. Don't dispute any overcharging included in your documents and your affidavits when you're filing later.
What's the name? What's the website URL?
Refusesmartmeters.com.
All right.
Refusesmartmeters.com. Now, I wanted to mention how you could diagnose these things. And, of course, every day I consult, believe it or not, I do it free, all over the world for doctors and patients all over the world, and I give them my recommendations on my nutraceuticals at NutriMedical.com.
Right, good.
And I know how to actually reverse environmental electrosensitivity syndrome, and I found out how to do it for myself.
Wow.
And that's on there. But we also have a protocol for Fukushima radiation that's very advanced. It's not just like take a few little things here and there, which you can find in any health food store. It's very advanced, and you can prove what I'm telling you because you can measure stool levels of radioisotopes, and you can measure other toxins. Now, I listened to a part of the interview with Jeffrey Smith, and he's brilliant. But here's how you actually can test what he's talking about. When you insert a gene, it's called a gene cassette, through what's called a gene cassette gun, into an organism, and it's usually either one gene or a bunch of genes in a group. That gene does a bunch of things. It doesn't just create a specific protein, let's say the enzyme to break down Roundup. What it does is it's not what's called intercalated into the gene complex. So it can't be switched on and off like other genes, which are associated with other genes in the sequence, or by other mechanisms that control the genomic expression of specific genes by environment or minerals or other things in the environment. And what it does then is it switches on and off genes throughout the entire genome. So the best way to think of it is you take this gene, which is the Roundup gene, and you insert it into, say, an organism to create Roundup Ready Corn or BT, Bacillus thuringiensis toxin.
Sure.
And BT toxin used to be, you'd spray it on flowers, and it would help to kind of cut down the pests. But when you put it inside things, I call it the taco chip from hell effect. That gene can jump not only into your gut bacteria, making your gut produce the BT toxin forever, but people have to understand this. The BT toxin gene can switch on and off hundreds or if not thousands of genes. And it can do things that you wouldn't expect. And the way to test it is actually very simple. A friend of mine that runs Great Plains Laboratory can actually tell you, because you can measure a thing called organic acid analysis. And the best measure of whether or not you're being poisoned with GM toxins is to measure the organic acids in your saliva, your blood, and your urine.
Organic acids, right?
Organic acids. If you actually go, it's called Great Plains Lab. If you Google it, and you think you're environmentally desensitized, your child is, and they'll develop every kind of illness. They'll get radiosensitivity to electropollution. They'll be sensitive to foods. They'll get autism. All these things are increasing because we're making the blood-brain barrier permeable, and we're generating organic acids. For example, all these kids with that have autism, we found a few interesting things. In fact, the director of the lab there was one of the doctors that was one of the first to discover this. He found that all the autistic kids had anaerobic bacteria that generated an analog of dopamine that you could pick up the organic acid in their urine, blood, and saliva. So their gut was generating because they had these weird bacteria. Now, when you insert these weird genes that get into your gut bacteria, you got more gut bacteria numbers than every cell in your body. So you got 120 trillion cells. You got more bacteria, and these bacteria don't just nourish the gut cells or colonocytes, because 75% of the nutrition to your gut cells come from short-chain fatty acids that your bowel probiotic bacteria make. Now, when you alter the genetics of those bowel bacteria, they generate other organic acids and other molecules totally foreign to human biology, and they can do anything. They can go to your liver, they can go to your brain, they can screw up different genes, they can have all kinds of epigenetic effects that you never expected. They have nothing to do with BT toxins. That's why we're seeing gerbils with purple scrotums and hair on the inside of their mouth and microcephaly where the brain is small and all kinds of other weird changes, because it has effects of, it's like having a madman inside a factory that has all kinds of dangerous equipment, cutting and welding and doing other things, and he's throwing switches, and it's all going down the conveyor belts, producing something that doesn't look like a car or any other kind of machine it's supposed to make. And that's what's happening inside the cell. So in other words, the biology of the human race is totally being screwed with by GM food. Then you have scalar radiation, and there's a thing called molecular electron cyclotron resonance. So what it does is a molecule basically has electrons that bounce from the outer orbitals, and they have a harmonic frequency. So you think of every molecule like a tuning fork in water solution. And if you hit the wrong frequencies, like the frequency of water is 2.4 gigahertz, the Zigbee network, if you hit a certain frequency, like the frequency for zinc or a frequency for mercury, you have the same biological effects on the organism if they're under a mercury ballasted light fixture as if they actually had mercury in their body. You follow me?
Yeah.
Now, the danger is...
you don't have mercury, but you got the energy of mercury in your body.
Right, and the energy basically has the same thing because it's in the same, what's called harmonic frequency, like
same thing.
Periodic table. It's like a musical scale as, say, zinc. So if you have mercury, it's going to jam up all the zinc metalloenzymes for cellular division.
So all these new light bulbs, if you happen to sit next to one, you're literally going to be absorbing a small amount of mercury energetically. Yeah,
the energetic effect has the same biological effect as the other. Now, I'm going to tell you some classified stuff. I took care of not only a facility back at Pratt & Whitney General Parts Plant in the late 80s, early 90s, but also worked with Q-level clearance with individuals working on blackout projects in Colorado on directed energy weapons. And the way they work is real simple. The ones are called tunable terahertz. Remember that number, terahertz, because terahertz frequencies are used in these imaging machines in the airports.
Right.
Terahertz are microwaves. They're between far infrared and the microwave frequency range in the electromagnetic spectrum. And they can unzip your DNA because they're only van der Waals forces. They're not covalent bonds. They're just basically hydrogen bonded, like your DNA is literally two strips of DNA wrapped around motor molecules held together by the energy that's so weak it's amazing. Okay?
All right.
So when you hit these specific scalar frequencies, you disrupt genes. Now, what the genes of the body are set up along with special receptors on the cell membrane, which are again also held up together by van der Waals forces. So when you're exposed to biotoxins, like all the hundreds of toxins, like if you took someone's urine that had exposure to GM, you're going to see all kinds of organic acids that human beings, say 20 or 30 years ago, would never have in their urine. So if they're eating GM soy or whatever, and then when you add weird things like scalar radiation, you start to turn on and off genes that were never supposed to be turned on or off. So you have the accumulative, exponential, exposure to toxins that reaches what I call the elbow and what I call the breakdown curve. In other words, the curve where all of a sudden the body says, I can't do this anymore. So you stop growing, like the Japanese with Fukushima. You stop having normal blood-brain barriers, so you get anti-brain antibodies causing dementia and autism. You start getting susceptibility to serious infections that ordinarily wouldn't affect human beings.
Right.
And you increase the risk also of a plague.
The whole herd immunity and disease competence, resistance competence goes down. Hold on a sec. We got to pause.
Yeah.
Back in just a minute. Okay, back with all of you great people and Dr. Bill Deagle. Okay, William, go right ahead.
While we were actually talking, I got an email from one of the listeners live in the show. It's great to hear that people are actually listening, and hopefully they're doing two things: asking better questions and getting pissed. And of course, this is a former worker for Southern California Edison nuclear steam electrician.
Oh.
We're working at Unit 1 of the Songs facility in the 80s. And he said, in the term, we were, quote, crapped up, meaning nuclear slang for contaminated, and zoomies were the slang name for neutrinos and other radionuclides that would poison us. It was tritium, and we were told that it was harmless even though it got in our lungs.
Oh, geez. He worked at he was at San Onofre?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, the Union hands prided themselves with the overtime breathing out the tritium in the badge out areas. You had to sit there and breathe out the tritium before you were able to go home.
Unreal.
But it was not prepared to wait for several hours sitting, so I would stand on my hands and breathe it out in about 20 minutes. And his question was, is tritium that harmful in your lungs? Well, let me explain what tritium is. Tritium is heavy water. And the way the tritium works on a molecular level in your DNA is it displaces the codons of your DNA by one base pair. Now, people think that's not much, one water molecule, heavy water molecule. But water molecules that have extra protons don't act like water molecules. They basically, neutrons. They move the base pairs of the DNA over one base, and that extra neutron, what it does, even though it doesn't have a charge, it makes the DNA not able to exactly replicate that codon, so you get an abnormal amino acid replacing the one because of that. So it causes point mutations. So, and all nuclear plants give off radiation. Now, I was mentioning also how you can measure the effects of some of the things like electromagnetic pollution and so on.
That's amazing what that man wrote in the email, that they actually used to make him wait 20 minutes so they breathed out all the tritium.
Yeah, now here's why you can measure. If you want to measure the effect, for example, there's a simple test. When they went after Chernobyl, and they had to take quite a while because you had to do what's called scanning electron microscopy, you can actually take a skin biopsy or a biopsy of the mouth or some other tissue that's rapidly replicating, and you just take a simple slide and put it under scanning EM, and you look for what's called micronuclei. Micronuclei are basically chunks of DNA that are kind of evaginated off the cell, and then the cell extrudes them, and they get in the extracellular space, and they can actually replicate in that space. You get big chunks, a whole lot of this micronuclei, a little invaginated with its own cell membrane around it, floating around the space between the cells and in the lymphatics. So if you actually were able to draw the lymphatic fluid off, you'd see a whole pile of micronuclei there. That's number one. Number two, you're going to see the presence of very high levels of oxidative stress markers, a thing called 8-hydroxy-2'-deoxyguanosine, which is oxidized guanosine, one of the base pairs in your DNA. And you're going to also see levels of oxidized fatty acids called T-bars. So these tests can be done. People say, oh, you can't measure it. You can also look at the profile of the specific tissues it's going to go to, because you can do a radioisotope scanning. You can actually put them through a radioisotope scan like the one we do for medical tests, and you can find out over a period of time where those radioisotopes are going to concentrate. And certain ones, like strontium, go directly to the bone. Cesium goes directly into, say, women, to the breast and to the glandular tissues because it's an analog of potassium. Strontium is an analog of calcium.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's all kinds of ways of doing this, but nobody, the EPA, the CDC, nobody's doing testing on anything, whether it's ELF pollution, genetically modified foods, the introduction of new processed food sweeteners. Most people don't realize that the PepsiCo company has factories in Mexico that are using genetic cell lines from aborted fetuses to make sweetening molecules and flavoring molecules that are now being put in a large amount of our food. So we now have GM food generating, if you were to take that GMO food, let's say GM corn, and you were to put through a high-pressure chromatography machine, and you're looking at all of the organic acids, you'd see all kinds of peaks that don't occur in normal corn. Not just the peak that you'd expect from, say, Bt toxin or something else that you put genetically in there,
right,
but probably hundreds of other molecules that were caused by the disruption of normal genetic control inside the cell. And that's why this is so damn dangerous. And then when you amplify it with, aspartame, Splenda, and then you got electropollution, the human race isn't going to be able to reproduce another generation. We're basically looking to, if we don't stop what we're doing, at the
Correct.
peak of what human beings
And
can be.
this could be the beginning of the irrevocable decline.
Well, it's like the Children of Men movie that came out about a decade ago. We're looking at a scenario, and I saw this coming decades ago, and I said, I don't think human beings are going to wake up to this.
No, it's too late.
And I remember being out in the oceans back in 1973, and I was out there doing my oceanography research before I went into medicine,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember seeing bunker C oil balls from oil being dumped from the bilges of the ships 500 miles out in the ocean. I thought, my gosh, I saw seals trapped with plastic around their neck and all kinds of garbage.
Yeah.
There's a garbage patch that's 3 times the size of Texas just under the water surface in the North Pacific. And now we've got the Humboldt current radioactive from Fukushima.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, human beings, it's not a matter of, if we lived properly in balance with the Earth, we could easily have 50 billion people safely on the planet with the ecosystems.
Point of no return is past, in my view.
It's also it's a pollution. It's also our lifestyle.
That's what I'm saying.
It wouldn't matter if we only had 1 million people on the Earth. If we lived like this, eventually the planet will die. And what we're doing, we're also seeing the planet is going through what I call, George Carlin said, the wet dog shakes of the planet. And you see all these earthquakes happening. In fact, I just got another emergency report that there's one that they expect to happen not too far south of here, near Ensenada, on the Baja California.
Uh-huh.
And the reason is They had in Chiapas 6.2 quake just the other day. They've had all these other big quakes occurring, and we're kind of next on the list because the San Andreas Fault, they don't call it the San Andreas when it gets across the U.S.-Mexican border. They call it something else. But guess what? There's been a whole bunch of really big quakes, like 7.2 in the last year, down at the southern end of the San Andreas Fault system, south of the U.S.-Mexican border. Now, why is this happening? It's happening because we are entering the midpoint of the transition, which takes about 30 years roughly, through what's called the gravity wave of the galactic plane of the galaxy.
All right, before we run out of time, I'm sure a lot of people would like to get your take. Hold on to that galactic wave.
Yeah, and that's going to precipitate more earthquakes and volcanoes.
The sounds.
The sounds, I think, are several things. Firstly, and I've been researching this in the last while as well, and it may be a little shocking for people what I'm going to just say, but we have high-speed maglev trains that don't just transit the United States, continental United States, but are all over the planet, that cross every continent and every ocean.
Well, and to back that up very quickly, the last picture of the most advanced tunnel boring machine, which was enormous, was taken and released in the 70s.
Yeah, well, the ones that I were told, because I took care of one of the gentlemen that worked with Phil Schneider, and they were using a tunnel boring machine that created zero debris. It used this impact lasers to strike the rock face and create a nanoparticle spray that they would spray at 10,000 degrees to create an obsidian core. They would lay down a tri-radiate 3-level track in 120 degrees, and they would basically, after they finished boring out that area, right, they would then vacuum out the track, and they'd make it unidirectional and put fiber optic cables in the ceiling and walls of the track.
Wow.
So these things are all over the planet, and they're ancient ones. In fact, when they were researching, and they get down to northern Mexico, and they found an area where they analyzed how old these tunnels were, which were virtually identical to the ones that they were building.
Really?
And they were those tunnels were estimated between 300 and 500,000 years old.
Well, that's Mars, all right? Underground.
Well, human beings have been around here much longer than they say.
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
Oh, yeah. Well, we've risen and fallen many times.
Exactly. Human beings are basically back like the miniseries Battlestar Galactica.
We haven't learned anything.
No, we haven't learned. We're back in the examination room. We have our 2 HB pencils, and we're not learning.
All right, so the sounds. Sounds
are basically two things going on. The Earth is cracking, and what happens is some of these vacuum tubes are allowing air to rush into them because the earthquakes are cracking down deep. Ordinarily, earthquakes are pretty superficial. They're 1.5, 2 miles down. Most of these maglev tracks, although they come up to the surface in many areas, most of the train tracks are running about 4.5 miles down, right? 1.5 to 4 miles down. So they're below where most of the quakes happen. When you get deeper down, the rocks are locked more tightly. So most of the smaller quakes, unless you get a really high-level quake like a 7 or 8, they don't get deep into the earth. It's very rare you'll get a deep, we call a quake, or an actual crack through a tectonic plate. They do happen, there have been in the last few decades, because the earth is buckling, because it's starting to receive the effects of the change in what's called the torsion field. Now, the torsion field is curved time-space. And so the plasma of the universe, everything in the universe is plasma. As we enter the torsion field of the gravity wave of the edge of the galaxy, it's firstly a debris field where there's 30 times more chance of a near-Earth object hitting Earth. It also changes with the movement of the plasma inside the stars and the plasma inside the hydrodynamic generator of the magnetic field of the Earth.
All right.
And when those flowing rivers change, they change the stress levels on the rocks above them.
Yeah.
So that periodically when you pass through this galactic plane, you get megaquakes and you get the Earth buckling. And of course, as these tunnels are broken, they have air rushing in, and that's why you hear this hooting sound like a big horn being blown, say, in these very cities.
Well, there's got to be a crack in the ground surface somewhere that the air passes through.
Yes. Well, what happens is they always have exit points, and the way they exit is they have to have elevator shafts that are using advanced technology to go down,
well, this
like
is
mines for a mile or
Phil
so.
Schneider stuff, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And what's happening is these tunnels are cracking, and as they crack, they allow air into the tunnel, and you get this large, whooping sound.
Well,
so that's my theory about what's going on.
That's an interesting one. We should add that to the list. We got a lot of good ideas about it, but what we do know...
That's based on That's based on working firsthand as a civilian with Q-level clearance, and they told me about these things, and I took care of one of the guys who worked with Phil on the tunnel boring machine, so I know about all the advanced technology in exquisite detail.
Well,
sodium-cooled nuclear reactors driven,
the machinery has got to be amazing. Just got to be incredible.
It's way, but listen, the technology we have is centuries ahead of what people think we have, and they'll never going to release it, even if they have radiation-proof robots that can fix Fukushima or any other technology.
No, they'll let the whole thing go down first. It's the biggest secret. It's like the space program that is.
They'd rather let half the population of Earth die
of course.
than release DARPA secrets to help get rid of the debris there, or actually seal it in so it won't poison the planet.
Well, I want to thank the gentleman for emailing in, too. That was very good.
Amazing comment, isn't it?
Yeah, there's some great people out there. Thank you,
Bill. We want to stretch people's view of the world, you know.
Yeah.
Your little view of the world, hopefully we took a large pin and burst it like a bubble tonight. So you realize what you thought you always knew, you never knew.
That's true. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, take care.
Good night. Dr. Bill Deagle. And again, I want to just commend all of you people. You're just the best. All right, we'll be right back.